Lovely, thank you. So welcome everybody to this community of practice. We are talking today about supporting family carers in Lewy body dementia research and practice. Housekeeping, we will be using the chat function for comments and questions. There'll be time for questions after all the speakers have had their part, and we've got a full session there coming ahead. We're really excited, in particular, to welcome Karen Young, our guest speaker, with her lived experience of being a carer. I'll go on to giving an introduction of Lewy body dementia now. We always do 5 minutes on this for each webinar because we do welcome new people each time. So apologies if you have heard this information from me before, but I think it's good to have a little recap. As I said before, my name's Angela Penny. I'm a speech and language therapist with a special interest in Lewy body dementia. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a quick summary. Lewy body dementia is a condition associated with abnormal deposits of alpha-synuclein protein in the brain, which are called Lewy bodies. And these deposits can lead to problems with thinking, with movement, behaviour and mood. There's a crossover with Parkinson's that comes in with the loss of dopamine neurotransmitter. Next slide, please. So there's something that we talk about called the 1-year rule, and that helps us with diagnosis. Lewy body dementia itself is an umbrella term for both Parkinson's disease dementia and dementia with Lewy bodies, and the difference mostly being that Parkinson's disease dementia starts 1 year or more after well-established Parkinson's disease, whereas dementia with Lewy bodies occurs before or at the same time as Parkinsonism, or within 1 year onset of motor symptoms. Lewy body dementia as a whole is the second most common cause of neurodegenerative dementia, with approximately 125,000 people in the UK with Lewy body dementia. And there's a lot of research on this. There's a consensus report cited there by Ian McKeith and colleagues up in Newcastle from 2005, which will give you more information about the 1-year rule, helping us differentiate between the two dementias if you'd like to do some extra reading. Next slide, please. So clinically, both dementia with Lewy bodies and Parkinson's disease dementia share some core features which make up Lewy body dementia. Predominantly, the condition has fluctuating levels of cognition and alertness, and this can change by the minute and by the hour. There's rapid eye movement, REM, sleep disorder. There are visual hallucinations, and these can often present as animals or people, including children. There's Parkinsonism with slowness, stiffness, and tremor. And cognitive decline and dementia can also feature, with attention, executive and visual spatial functions being particularly affected, with memory recall less affected. So I hope that just gives a little bit of an overview of Lewy body dementia. I will move on now to introduce you to Alison Bentley to talk about the experience and impact of Lewy body dementia on family caregivers.
Thank you, Angela. Yes, my name's Alison. I'm a researcher and also community nurse by background, and I'm working at University of East Anglia. Next slide. And today, in this session, I'll look at the evidence base around experiences and the impact on family caregivers. Next slide. So research around experience and impact on family caregivers specific to Lewy body dementia is limited. There's much more research around dementia carers generically. However, there's been a recent review highlighting that up until now, there's been a reliance on quantitative surveys in which the evidence base is dominated by standardised measurements. Looking specifically at caregivers, most studies use care burden scales and stress or distress were the most studied topics. So these scales have been valuable in researching with other dementias such as Alzheimer's and comparing, but they are not always suited to capture the complexity and depth of experiences and perspectives of caring for somebody with Lewy body dementia. There is a need to balance with more qualitative research methods, which are much more suited to capture day-to-day insights and nuances, challenges faced specifically by Lewy body dementia carers. And to have an impact on carer-focused support, it's imperative to look at areas of research carers feel is most important to them. This is because there's currently insufficient data to develop effective strategies, support and delivery methods for caregivers, as well as having appropriate outcome measures. Next slide. So what's already known? By looking at previous research, it's been possible to highlight that carers often face delays and confusion around diagnosis, leading to anxiety and lack of preparedness. Emotional strain is heightened by unpredictable symptoms and unclear disease progression. And carers struggle with hallucinations, delusions, and fluctuating cognition, which are often more pronounced in Lewy body than other dementias. Next slide, please. So a study that did talk to Lewy body dementia carers specifically found that there was a need for information and support. It was really important also to have access to support groups with others in similar situations. They also talked about the importance of being able to access professionals for guidance, particularly around managing emotions and behaviours, and also how to manage their emotional stress effectively. They also talked of the physical care responsibilities, which can be greater than other forms of dementia, and this is due to the Parkinson's aspect of the condition and the crossover with dementia. Medication management, bathing and continence were key concerns, and morning routines were described as long and exhausting. Instrumental care burdens such as managing appointments, organising activities, doing the driving, keeping up with household tasks all added to their stress and workload. And carers are also concerned about their own personal needs, and particularly around their cognitive health, and this was often due to fatigue and stress, and particularly sleepless nights. They also talked of their future fears, the cost of care, and what would happen if they themselves become unwell. Next slide. So we can see from research already published, a key common thread for family caregivers is the need for information, support and education. In response to this need, 2 of our members have previously looked at the feasibility and appropriateness of psychosocial interventions. They looked at how this might be approached and what the benefits may be. Next slide, please. So an in-person group was developed and evaluated by Alison and the team in Newcastle in the UK. 19 people with DLB and the care partners took part. The focus group sessions took place with the aim to provide social support and education on cognitive and physical changes. They also ran separate groups for the caregivers, which included disease progression, behavioural challenges and ways to cope and thrive. The focus was on positive coping strategies with the use of gratitude diaries, goal setting, mindfulness tools to promote a positive outlook and gaining control. The sessions had a high level of engagement and attendance. Improvements were reported around increased understanding and confidence around participants. The other group session, evaluated by Rachel and Dementia UK, provided online psychosocial groups for families. 4 carer groups were delivered with between 5 and 8 carers per group. And the 6-week programme was structured to include sessions on symptoms, coping strategies, self-care and future planning for caregivers. And positive outcomes were reported around improving mental well-being, increased practical knowledge and stronger community connections. Further research is required to fully evaluate the impact and benefits of these psychosocial groups. It can be really difficult to take them on the next level in research due to funding, and large-scale studies are difficult to orchestrate. And there's also an investment need for when the research has been completed for these to be rolled out into the general community. Next slide, please. So one study aiming to do this is the Persevere study currently being conducted in America. And this is testing a virtual peer monitoring and education-based intervention to support LBD caregivers. And the 12-week education programme again covers a wide range of topics, including motor and cognitive symptoms, self-care and care planning. Initial results have showed improved caregiver knowledge, confidence and reduced depressive symptoms through the intervention. And to assess the long-term impact, participants complete surveys over 9 months to evaluate their quality of life. And this study is still ongoing, and there's a link here on the slide if you'd like to look up the study, initial findings and updates. Next slide, please. So what research areas are important to caregivers? Well, a web-based survey conducted by the Lewy Body Association asked people about their research priorities and views on taking part in research. So I've just looked at the caregiver results, and 3 of the 5 top research priorities include disease modification therapies, development of diagnostic texts, and better understanding of how and why changes occur in the body when somebody develops Lewy body dementia. So the current caregivers were more likely to prioritise symptom treatments and defining disease progression, which makes sense if they're living the experience at the time this survey was conducted. And former caregivers considered understanding risk factors and improving provider education as important. So the need to provide education and raise awareness of the condition amongst healthcare professionals is a common comment from carers, and that's one of the reasons this community of practice was set up in the initial stages. Next slide, please. So the web-based survey also asked people views about taking part in research and found that many had never taken part in research at all. They talked of potential barriers, including lengthy travel, time constraints, impairment of the person with Lewy body dementia, and mistrust and misperceptions about research. And this is often around placebo and medication trials. Many were unaware of caregiver-focused research opportunities. So some practical solutions to support carers become involved in research may include raising awareness in local research teams, ensure travel costs included in research bids to ensure participants aren't out of pocket, and due to time constraints, consider if research can be carried out at home or a convenient local clinic. And finally, building trust is really important. So working collaboratively with carers early on for engaging in research, but also to be part of that research team. Next slide, please. So it's helpful if we can signpost carers to local and national research initiatives, depending on where you live. One example is Join Dementia Research. This is a UK-wide dementia research service that connects volunteers with studies that they could take part in. They're particularly interested in reaching people with a mild cognitive impairment or a diagnosis of dementia, and they're also interested in family members and or carers, as they have studies looking into genetics behind diseases, as well as studies that look into experience of being a carer for somebody with dementia. By signing up to Join Dementia Research, that does not mean the individuals is agreeing to participate in all studies they're matched to. Volunteers can choose which studies they'd like to take part in and when they're matched to them, and there's no obligation to take part. They will receive a notification about the study they have been matched to, letting them know, and they can then choose. And often Lewy body dementia studies may be posted here. Next slide. Thank you very much. I've just listed some of the studies I've briefly mentioned in this talk, and I'll now hand you over to Rachel to introduce our guest speaker, Karen.
Thank you, Alison. I'm hoping everybody can see and hear us okay. Please do put any comments in the chat. I think, as Angela was saying earlier on, that we will be coming to Q&A at the end. We'll pick things up through the chat function. My name is Rachel Thompson. I'm a consultant analyst for Lewy body dementia. I'm delighted that Karen Young is joining us today. So Karen, just to start off with, I'm just going to ask you if it's okay to share some of your lived experience of caring for somebody with Lewy body dementia. So can you tell us a little bit about Alan and your journey as a carer?
Yeah, well, so if I just start a little bit about myself, maybe, and us. So we've been married for 45 years. We have 4 children and 7 grandchildren. And initially started to notice changes in Alan as early as 2016. So with REM sleep, he was always famous in our family for his very sort of vivid dreams, and we used to describe them as Dad's nighttime antics. But fast forward, we both knew that something was wrong, and 2019, Alan was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. But prior to that, he had been referred to the memory service in Birmingham, which is where we lived at the time. And really, they just said they did a range of the cognitive testing, and they just said basically just needed to concentrate more. So 2019, a diagnosis of Parkinson's, but for us, it always was the memory issues and the cognitive decline. We saw a range of professionals, neurologists, Parkinson's nurses, geriatricians. Our story was the same. And it wasn't until we moved to Sheffield, finally, in 2022, he had a diagnosis of Lewy body dementia. But it was just a diagnosis, literally, this is what it is. I asked for information. He said, you can join a support group. That's the neurologist. I said, I didn't really want to join a support group. I wanted to meet professionals. I wanted information. And he just said, well, you can wait 3 months and then you can see a Parkinson's nurse. And that was it. We left the room.
So how did that feel, Karen, when you were given that diagnosis and very little to go with?
Yeah, it was hard, and I just felt quite lost. Alan is a really different character to me. He tends not to. He just really just keeps things to himself. He's very sort of self-contained and always has been. And we just sort of we did wait to see our Parkinson's nurse. And sorry, I missed a point a bit out. We got referred to the memory clinic in Rotherham, and then we saw a psychiatrist who confirmed Alan's diagnosis. But really, the experiences were very different. The psychiatrist gave us 1.5 hours, and I think from that experience, just really felt supported and listened to. And he said if he had just met Alan, he wouldn't have diagnosed him with Lewy body. It's only because he took the time to take the history that he was able to confirm the diagnosis, and the memory service have been absolutely superb.
So you have had some good support, but there's clearly been gaps when you initially got your diagnosis about how to understand the condition. Yeah. So you've been with Alan for a long time, obviously, and you've been now caring and supporting him for quite a few years. What would you say are the most difficult or most challenging parts of caring for Alan, or being a carer even?
Yeah, I think initially it was just the changes in Alan, that Alan didn't see those himself, and that was tough. But I think that for me, Alan is my best friend. He's my soulmate. You know, we're very different people, but we're a really good team. And I've lost that. You know, I now run the show, and it's not about saying, oh, like, woe is me, because I do everything. But things like, you know, practical things like dealing with builders, DIY. Alan was absolutely brilliant at that. And driving, massive was driving, because whilst I do drive, Alan did all the long journeys, and then all of a sudden he could no longer drive, and I became the main driver for both of us. And then it's coping with a disease that's a degenerative disease, and it's constantly changing. And in the beginning, it was really, really hard, and I did really struggle with it. And I actually without being dramatic, I described it almost like drowning, gasping for air when some certain things happened, and I just really didn't know what to do. And I did feel lost in the beginning, and trying to find information. A neurologist who wanted to increase Alan's medication when I knew that the co-carbidopa could increase cognitive confusion, and almost being given a bit of a fait accompli, but not really being given room to be partners in Alan's care, because I think that, you know, we're more than capable of doing that and having the room and the space to do that. But I do recognise that as professionals, you are very time limited, and that is tough because you have to balance a caseload against an individual. But we are on a journey. We're on a journey. You're on a journey. And like I've said before, I feel like there's a journey and you get off at different stops. So like now, I feel that I'm at a good point now. There's been lots of adjustment, lots of changes, lots of learning, being able to get involved in different organisations, which I think Rachel's going to ask me about next. So I'm not going to talk about that. And I feel there's times of adjustment. So for the moment, I feel I've had a big adjustment over time, but like a cog in a wheel, constantly changing, constantly moving. But I feel that I'm in a good place now, and well connected, well supported.
That's really good to hear, Karen. We heard from Alison before about the challenges that are experienced by family carers, particularly around Lewy body dementia. Was there any particular symptoms that have been very difficult for you?
Yeah, cognition.
And is it the changes in the cognition that are hard? Yeah,
like, you know, say for example, just last week, Alan has a very simple phone. This is it. I don't know if you can see it, but it's he used to have an iPhone, but we got him a more simpler phone. But even this phone, Alan couldn't use. Now, my husband is a chartered civil engineer. He wrote a government document. He would speak at numerous conferences. He was an expert witness for either developers or local authorities on big building projects. He had to have information at his fingertips. And it's hard sometimes when you just come to a point where you've tried to explain it different ways, but it's just not gonna work. And I think it's the constant, okay, now he's not able to do this now, and so that those changes. But I really enjoyed listening to Alison, because it would really resonated with me, how she described about the caring responsibilities, and you talked about delays and emotional strain and the fluctuations in the condition, and I would say that is definitely echoes my experience.
I mean, something that we've talked about, Karen, is hallucinations that Alan does experience. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and how you manage those?
So Alan sees lots of times, he sees children and animals, but recently, if he becomes ill, then the hallucinations become more disturbing. He's still able at the moment to differentiate between what is real and what isn't real. But for example, this week, Monday, he came into the bedroom crying because he said, I've seen a child's dead. It's lying by the fireplace. It's got an injury to his head. You know, that's really distressing. A few weeks ago, he saw a ball in the bedroom and he called it out because we don't sleep in the same room anymore because of him acting out his dreams. And I could tell immediately by his voice that he was distressed. But as I said, in the main, Alan is able to differentiate. And for me, I get upset for Alan, because it's not really, you know, that those things are really not very nice to see. We were on holiday glamping, and that change in scenery had a massive impact on Alan, and he was hallucinating. He was really confused. He didn't know where he was. And I'll just be open and honest with you. He was incontinent where he'd not been incontinent. So I just said, Alan, just don't wear anything, on your, and just don't wear any pants, just sleep in the bed. But then that really disturbed him, because he saw a man in his bed. So these are really real things for Alan. But I find that, yes, they're distressing, but I just say, trying to bring him back into the present, or he often thinks there's people in the house. And that disturbs him. But I say, well, there's only you and me. Our daughter lives with us at the moment, and our grandchildren. He often does hear children. He's heard our grandchildren when we're on holiday in another hotel, and he left the hotel to go and find them. So that was very distressing in Mallorca. So it is a big part of Alan's condition.
Yeah. I know one of the things you sometimes say about yourself, Karen, is that you're a kind of a cup half full type of person. I think that really comes across. I'm sure that's not always been your experience, and for other people it often isn't, as it's harder, isn't it? But what would you say has helped you? What supported you in your experience?
Well, I am quite an extrovert. I do enjoy being with people, but what I was finding is more and more with Alan, my time was taken up by Alan, and my mum has been very poorly recently as well. And we have our daughter living with us with 2 grandchildren. So it's quite busy. And I found that actually I was getting smaller and smaller in all of this, and I recognised the importance of making time for myself. I absolutely love cycling. We live in a village on the outskirts of Sheffield, and I had a walking group which I set up when we first came here, because I thought, well, I can either be miserable and alone, or I can do something about it. So we have a walking group called Soul Sisters, SOLE, and then I belong to a cycling group in the village, and that's amazing. It's just joyful being out with friends, being in the most beautiful place. I am able to feel joy, and I'm really thankful for that. But 14 months ago, I came off my bike. We did a 70-mile cycle ride, electric bike, I want you to know, not a mount, just a normal pedal bike. Around Loch Ness, and unfortunately at the finish line I bumped into my friend. She went one way, I went the other, and I broke 4 bones in my elbow. So then the joy of my life, which was cycling, I took a long time to recover, but then there was this like real dilemma. Am I going to get back on my bike? Because if I get back on my bike and I have another injury, I won't be able to look after Alan. And is that a sensible thing to do? And I was really like deliberating for a long time, but I did get back on my bike about 3 weeks ago, and it was amazing. Me and my friend, we put it full throttle on turbo, and we sped up the hill. And when I came back, I felt different, and I thought, I need this. I absolutely need this. And then another thing we did, someone asked us what we do together, and I said, well, we go to the hospital together. And so I thought we need to address this. So Alan and I do boxing together, and we do boxing, and it's the local Parkinson's group is brilliant in Sheffield, very, very active. You can do something every day of the week, but this is actually funded by the National Boxing Association. And Alan loves it, and I really love it, and it's great fun. One of the guys said to me, "You punch hard, don't you?"
So there's definitely something, isn't there, about still being able to have fun together or finding ways. But you've spoken to me a lot about the importance of peer support, Karen. How's that been important to you?
Yeah, well, I think I'm someone who thrives on education, information. So initially, we didn't have any information, and if I have had cancer in the past, and you see a specialist cancer nurse, where with Lewy body you just get the diagnosis and that's it, bye off on your way. The memory service have provided a lot of support, so I joined their START program, which has been really brilliant to talk through the issues. It was my time. I decided it was going to be every fortnight. I didn't want it every week because I felt that would be too much. and just to have strategies. One I remember called the signal breath. Just when something happens, you just take 5 minutes and you just breathe, not even 5 minutes actually, just a minute. And then also looking at triggers, because at that time I was really struggling with the changes in Alan. And like, for me, I didn't want to be like Cruella de Vil, you know, driving off into the sunset. I wanted to be more like Mother Teresa. And so trying to get a balance of someone in between that, and knowledge has helped me. And when I described a story with the neurologist where he wanted to increase the medication, I was really conflicted then, because here is an eminent neurologist, and here's me, doesn't know anything. I'm not a clinician. I don't have any medical background, but I knew what I'd read and I knew what we were experiencing. And that's when I contacted the Lewy Body Society. And Jackie Cannon was absolutely amazing. You know, she listened and she reassured me, and she said, Karen, you are an expert in your husband. And I thought, I am an expert in my husband. So that reassurance. And then the Rare Dementia Society, they've also been fantastic. They have 2 groups. One is for people living with dementia, and then for carers like myself, two separate groups. And that's really good for Alan, and it's really good for me, because they're private spaces where Alan can talk about anything that he wants to with people that understand. They decide the agenda, and it's the same for us. But also, Rachel, you have been amazing too. You know, when Alan had he sort of like a consecutive UTIs over about 3 months, and the change in him, he was doubly incontinent. I couldn't move him in the bed. Sorry, because that really worried me. And just to be able to pick up the phone and say, what do I do, and to feel that reassurance. And I think that is what's really missing. It's so, it's wonderful what we heard from Alison, but it's so much a postcode lottery. It's so patchy. And if we could somehow, I think there's a lot of work to be done. They say treatment of Lewy body changes, advancements. Maybe the medical, it's moving forward, but definitely for carers, it hasn't changed for 30 years. Well, I want to be part of that change.
Thank you so much, Karen. So I guess we're going to have to move on, but thank you for contributing so honestly and so openly. I know you're aware of the challenges for professionals with limited time, but what would you say to people on the call? We've got a mixture of Parkinson's nurses and dementia nurses and OTs and speech and language therapists and physios. Have you got any key messages for them about supporting people like you?
Yeah, for me, I want to thank you for being part of this webinar, because it is about education for yourselves, but also for me as well on my journey. And to meet professionals who understand makes a massive, massive difference, because I feel that I can have that assurance that they know about the illness. But Alan was diagnosed, as I said, in 2022, and it wasn't until 2023 that someone asked me how I was doing. And then I was like, wow, I'm not doing very well, actually. And from that moment on, my life changed, because I got linked up with the carers group, Crossroads Care. I was able to have people that I could talk to. It was my time. And I'm working really closely with the memory service in Rotherham, and they've been amazingly supportive. Alan's had cognitive stimulation, cognitive rehabilitation. As I said, I've done the START programme with them. And we're now going to set up a support group for people with Lewy body who live in South Yorkshire, which is where I live, because I recognise that, not everyone is like me. My background is information advice and guidance. I work with deaf people in that capacity, but I want to be able to reduce isolation, to bring people together. There's a wealth of knowledge out there, to see what people want. It's really interesting to hear, what was done by the University of East Anglia, but it's so fragmented, it's so disjointed. So it is trying to sort of bring people together.
Yeah.
And that just for one thing, I want to encourage you to join the movement for change. If I could say anything, it's about educating your colleagues on the Diamond Lewy Toolkit, which is produced by the University of Newcastle. Because if the clinicians that we had seen in the beginning had known about the Diamond Lewy, absolutely Alan would have been diagnosed earlier. And that would have saved a lot of confusion, because there was the time when it was like, well, has he got Parkinson's? Has he got Lewy body? Are these right? Who's right? So it's really about education and about being part of the change. So I hope you'll leave this webinar feeling inspired, because you do an amazing job. You play an amazing part in the lives of people like me. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. I think if we were all in the same room as you, there would be a massive round of applause. But thank you so much for sharing your story today. So there'd be some opportunity, hopefully, at the end if anybody's got any specific questions. So we'll move on, if that's okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about recognising and assessing carers' needs very briefly before I hand over to Alison, who's going to talk to us about some strategies. So just as a reminder, I am going to skip through these slides, but some of you may be familiar with the NICE guidance on supporting carers, that we are supposed to identify any psychological distress and psychosocial impact from the carer. And I've underlined a bit about including after the person with dementia has entered residential care, because I think that sometimes gets forgotten. And actually family carers still need support. It's a very difficult transition. The assessment, management support for people with dementia and their carers talks about things like individualised care plans, coordination of care, psychological therapy, supporting people, particularly around acute care admissions, which we know can be very distressing, offering psychosocial interventions, but also, importantly, the availability of groups, which we've heard a little bit actually from Alison earlier on. So how do we assess caregivers' unmet needs? And I suppose from the literature, we recognise that, and also, as Alison has said, that the needs of people with dementia are often around understanding the specifics of Lewy body dementia, about being able to develop caregiving skills that help managing distressing situations, about accessing practical support, and also the person's social needs. There is no one tool, and a lot of the systematic reviews have talked about the fact there's no one specific tool that adequately assesses all of these, but there's a range of tools. And I suppose the message is that just thinking about, well, what are the needs that you're identifying? Is it a physical health need for the carer, because often carers neglect their own healthcare? Is it an emotional need? We also know that people struggle particularly more with things like anxiety, depression. Do they need some very practical help? Do they need a carer's assessment? Because lots of carers still don't know that they're entitled to this. Or are they needing some support around their role adaptation? And that's one thing that Karen spoke about quite clearly. So I'm just going to share a couple of very brief scales that or information that are helpful. Hopefully most of you know about the carers needs assessment, which is available via the local authority in adult social care. This should include an assessment of the daily pattern, any overnight care needs, practical tasks that the carer provides, getting time to themselves, which is away from the person with dementia. I've heard really very clearly from Karen how important that is. There's some financial assessment that goes on, as we know, and it shouldn't just be about this, but I often signpost people to Age UK because they've got a really good benefits line. But it also, a care support plan should include how people can access respite. They should be training and care skills should be offered, may not always be available, but also as well as the practical, getting help at home, care support groups, and where to go to get advice. So the Zarek Caregiver Burden Interview, this has been around for a long time. You will see the original version was in 1980 by Zarek, and there are some shorter versions now. What this looks at is a combination of caregivers' health, personal social life, financial situation, emotional well-being, and interpersonal relationships. So certainly the 12-item scale is quite helpful if you're worried about a carer and you just want to get an idea about what's going on for them and the areas that they're struggling with. Sidecar, I don't know if people have come across this one. This is free for download. I think if you just put it in any kind of web-based search, but this is a scale which is developed with carers of people with dementia. It's not Lewy body specific, but there's 3 scales. There's the direct impact on the person. There's the indirect impact, which is the emotional impact, and then there's the need for support and information. It's a binary tool. It's agree or disagree, but again, it can just help highlight the areas that carers are particularly struggling with, so that you can work out what support needs they have. Another useful tool which looks at quality of life is the Carers DemQual. This again, another free for download via the Brighton Sussex Medical School. It looks at a range of factors: how supported somebody feels, the impact on the carer-patient relationship, how well somebody's meeting personal needs, their confidence in the future. This is really important for families, and also very importantly, the carer well-being. So again, these are all available. Please do take photos of any slides that you think will be useful. What can you do to support assessment of family care's needs? Because some of you may feel you haven't got the time and the capacity and the background to do this. But very simply, and Karen said it quite powerfully, ask people how they are. Find out what their needs are. Make sure that people are involved in the conversations, and family carers might need a separate time just to say, when the person with dementia isn't there, this is what's happening for me. Acknowledging the emotional impact of caring, which is huge, and this notion of anticipatory grief that some of you will be familiar with, which carers really do feel. And then the huge importance of people having access to the right and the appropriate information and support. I've got a link here to Admiral nurses. There may be Admiral nurses in your area. You can find out that from the Dementia UK website, but also the Admiral Nurse Dementia Helpline or the online clinics are available if there's no Admiral Nurse in your area. And again, the information about that is via Dementia UK website, so please do share. I'm going to hand over to Alison Killen now. So welcome, Alison. She's a research associate with NHR, Newcastle Biomedical Research Centre. So over to you, Alison. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thank you, Rachel. And particular thank you to Karen. That was an amazing, amazing presentation, and really enjoyed listening to you. And I hope that you're looking at some of the messages in the chat, Karen, as well, because there's a lot of supportive messages there. And when we set up these webinars, we always wonder, where should we put the person with lived experience? Because, that's always the most powerful and most impactful talk of the day, isn't it? So thanks for that. And I'm just going to wrap up really in some ways, but also this is the opportunity for all of you to participate as well. So I'm hoping you're wide awake and willing to contribute to the chat as we go along on this session. So there is a bit of reinforcement, I guess, of things that people have said already, but I hope there'll also be some things that are new and useful. And at the end, in a few minutes, there is a slide that's got some resources on. So as Rachel said, if you take a photo of that, then you might be able to look up things later which are useful. So just a few coping strategies, because for a lot of you, you'll be supporting family carers to go on and support the person with a Lewy body condition in their caregiving role. So it's really important that you're equipped to do that. Next slide, please. So we heard from Ali earlier about a lot of research evidence for different studies that have been done. But in a way, I'm really talking anecdotally, I guess, because I work into a Lewy body clinic in Newcastle. I know Claire's on the call as well, who also works into that. And I want really to talk briefly about what I would say most carers that we come across seem to find most difficult. And the reason for that is, you cannot solve every problem for every person, and you cannot give strategies for everything. So sometimes it's important to prioritize for people. Next slide, please. So I would say, and I think probably Karen reinforced most of these things in what she said, or she touched on several of them really. The things that people who are caring for people with Lewy body conditions tend to struggle with are listed here. The lack of knowledge, uncertainty over the progression and the course of the disease, not having a peer group, not having enough sleep, and how to cope with the various neuropsychiatric symptoms. So I'm just going to look into those. Next slide, please. So I hope you can read that writing. It looks a bit small on my screen, but anyway, in terms of lack of knowledge, it's a complex disease. Sometimes people don't really know that that's okay to say. And a lot of carers feel that they should understand everything about the disease. Now, we don't understand everything about the disease, do we? So I think that's an important thing to share. I think it's important to acknowledge that there's lots more to learn. You don't have to know everything. Everybody around you doesn't know everything about the disease, and just normalize that lack of knowledge. And then focus with the person on what is their most impactful problem. If they're really struggling with managing hallucinations, don't try and take up the headspace with all of the other explanations for the other factors and symptoms. Focus on what is most impactful for them. And then signpost to resources that are credible. So we all know what a rabbit hole you can go down if you start Googling things. If you refer people to, they don't need a lot of sites, do they? Lewy Body Society, Dementia UK, Parkinson's UK, but credible sites that you can trust the information on, or print leaflets out for them. The Lewy Body Society has leaflets to download. It's quite hard reading things online sometimes, and as we know, not all of our patients and families are online anyway. You can also get free information sent to you to pass on to them. And there's also going to be a carer's guide coming out next year, hopefully, if people want to have a one-stop shop and have a book with everything in it. Next slide, please. So the next thing is uncertainty. In a fluctuating condition, if you do Google things, the lifespan is very variable over a number of years. It's really hard for people to not know what's going to happen next. And I think that feeds into uncertainty with all of us. Humans like predictability. We like to know what the next step is. And that's really hard with Lewy body dementia. So I would say one thing to work with people on is this idea of acceptance. If they're able to look into therapy, then ACT therapy, acceptance and commitment therapy, is probably a really relevant therapy for people to look into, more than perhaps CBT or something like that. But the idea of acceptance really is not liking what's going on. Acceptance is more saying, well, this is where we are. This is the situation that we're in. I'm not going to struggle against it because I know I can't change it. So how are we going to move forward with it? And that's a very different mindset to liking something or to constantly fighting against it. The next thing I would say is try and balance advanced planning, which is really important, and present day living, because focusing too much on now and not thinking ahead about potential care needs and things can be hard, because then they can come on you unawares when there's a crisis situation. But if you're constantly looking ahead, you can miss the sort of daily joys, such as they are, and as Karen said, you know, the moments of joy. And then the last one, really, I would say, is trying to help people to avoid social comparison when they do go to groups and meet other people, if they have Lewy body dementia or if they have a different dementia. It's really hard not to look at somebody and say, well, they look like they've got it all together, they look like they're coping, or their person that they're caring for doesn't have XYZ symptoms, which my partner has. It's really not fruitful, because as we know, especially with fluctuations, that person could be having a particularly good day, or they could have a lot of other social problems or health problems that you don't know about because you only see them in that moment. So trying to help carers to avoid that is also useful. The next one, please. So lack of a peer group. And maybe if you could just pop in the chat, are there any peer groups locally to where you live where people can meet people with Lewy body dementia? Be really interested to know if there are, because as Karen said, they are pretty few and far between. So if you know of any, please put them in the chat, because there might be colleagues on this call who could really benefit from those. There is in St Helens, excellent. Is that a Lewy body group? And if it is that, it's brilliant. I would say the Rare Dementia Support Network is brilliant, and that's based in UCL in London, but they do have some networks across the country. I think there's only 7 or 8. So if you live in the Northeast, the Northeast Network is going to be starting with the first meeting in Gateshead next month. So that's good. But the idea of Rare Dementia Support is that they've identified 7 less common, I would say Lewy body is not that rare, but less common dementias. And they do have Zoom meetings and also in-person meetings specifically for Lewy body or specifically for the rarer dementias. So having looking in the chat here, there are a few groups going on, general carer support groups, yeah, which is really good. So I would encourage you to have a look at the UCL one and signpost people to that and find out if there is a network near you, or if not, maybe you could start one, because I think they are quite valuable. There are some other peer support groups getting put up there, which is really good. So do take note of those if you're in a similar area. Carers Trust is brilliant at supporting carers regardless of the condition. They've got a lot of local groups, and people can put their postcode in and find the local one of those. Right, someone's saying there might be one in Exeter. That's good. Alzheimer's Society do have an online forum, and so sometimes people could find other people with different dementias, not just Alzheimer's. Parkinson's UK, yeah, also excellent at putting support together. So it looks like there's quite a lot there, and partnerships with Alzheimer's. And the other way that you can kind of encourage carers to meet other people with a similar condition is trying to get them involved in research. Because if they sign up for dementia research, or specifically Lewy body research, quite often there are feedback events or engagement events attached to the research study, or they might meet people when they go up for the research scans or whatever they need to have done. So as well as all the benefits of research, that is a sort of secondary benefit, is that you might meet people with that same condition as you. So also public engagement events, you know, sometimes universities with a particular interest in dementia, or like in Newcastle with Lewy body dementia, will have public engagement events where they disseminate their research. And again, you might, by the by, meet other people who are interested in the same thing. So there's a lot of work in Lewy body dementia in sort of Manchester, Exeter, various London universities, Newcastle, as I've mentioned. So, you know, if you're near any of those places. Somebody has mentioned Kent, and I do know somebody who lives in Kent who goes to the London meetings. So, you know, if people are able to travel, then that's quite useful. So there does seem to be some peer support, and it's something that people find hard to reach out to. So sometimes they do need somebody to either go along with them the first time or build the links for them if they don't have the confidence to do that themselves, which is difficult for some people, particularly in terms of prioritizing their needs as carers. Next slide, please. So just kind of two more issues which are sometimes a big problem, one of which is coping with sleep. So just pop in the chat while you're all engaged, hopefully. Why might coping with, what sort of might affect your sleep if you're a carer for someone with Lewy body dementia? Anything that you think might affect your sleep? I'm guessing Karen would say that she doesn't always sleep well. Yeah, wandering, shouting, confusion, REM sleep disorder. Yeah, that's a big one, isn't it? Yeah, good. I think you've all overlapped on that one, sleep disturbances. And just general interruptions overnight. Yes, you're right. Waking up, hallucinations, vivid dreams, whatever we're going to label them as. Thank you. So next slide, please. And thank you to Sophie and Helen, who've come up with two other ones, one of which I've got on here. So I would say the main two causes are REM sleep behaviour disorder and carer stress, whatever you call it, worry, anxiety. So those are two really significant reasons why people don't sleep. And that's significant, isn't it? If you haven't slept well, then everything in the day is really hard work. So Rachel's mentioned one of the burden interviews, and I think if people come to you with carer stress, then it's important to know to what level it is. And although formal measures are not everything, they are quite useful. So it doesn't really matter which measure you use. I've put 2 or 3 here, but just be consistent. You know, if you measure their stress on one scale, then when you go back to see them again, obviously use the same scale so you can see the changes. And it just gives you some idea, as well as the conversation, you know, to what level the stress is building and whether you might need to sort of help them to seek further advice on that. So we've got an interesting story there about someone's hallucinations, and yeah, hallucinations and vivid dreams, and somebody trying to evacuate you from the house obviously doesn't help your sleep, does it? So find out how stressed people are. Sleep hygiene, there's lots and lots online, isn't there, about sleep hygiene in terms of routine and things that can help people to get ready for bed and feel sleepy, avoiding caffeine, avoiding alcohol, all those sort of things. Helping carers to cope with REM sleep behaviour disorder so that the person they're caring for can sleep, and so can they is another important one. Helping people to recognise that they might need to sleep in separate rooms, and that's okay, and that shouldn't have any stigma associated with it if it keeps them safe, if the person is lashing out in their sleep and things. Lots of people have a sort of like a baby alarm, a monitor from one room to the other, and make the bed clear around the person with the sleep disorder and things so that they're unlikely to hurt themselves if they do lash out. And then self-care and self-compassion, and the support group that Ali mentioned earlier, which we set up, some of the things that we did, like the gratitude diaries and the journaling, were really part of this idea of, you know, people looking after themselves, and that self-care shouldn't be seen as being indulgent or self-indulgent or an add-on, but it should be a necessary part of everybody's daily life as a carer. And it's a really difficult thing, and something that I'm sure you recognise often gets missed out and is the last thing, because people are so intent on caring for the person with the Lewy body condition. But obviously if they're over caring for that person, then they're under caring for themselves, and that's not sustainable in the long term. So lots of things around self-compassion which can reduce stress and help people to sleep. And the START manual, which has been mentioned earlier, which is a course which is actually freely available as well for people. So if you want to run through even a couple of the sessions with somebody you're caring for, you can freely download those as well, which is great if you Google those. So sleep deprivation is a big issue, as is this idea of fluctuations, the sort of good days and bad days, and the changes in awareness that people have. So I'm just going to ask you to read through this little story on the next slide, please. So as you've finished reading that, I'd just like us to spend a little bit of time on thinking about this idea of how you would support Joy if Joy came to you and asked, you know, where do I go from here? What can you advise? How can you help me? There's quite a bit to unpack there, isn't there? But anyone who can come up with some suggestions, please do. So thanks, Helen, for kicking us off there. So Helen says, give her time to tell her story. Yeah, and we'll come up with that again, validation for Joy. And it's really hard, isn't it, when sometimes the carers just don't feel heard. And I think Karen touched on this. You know, everybody else has got their views, but they're not living with them 24 hours a day. The carers' assessment needs, yeah, really important, isn't it? Because it sounds like Joy is quite overburdened, doesn't it? Yeah, seeing what Sue is able to do. Please look at the chat. Hopefully you've all got it enabled there, because there's some really good suggestions here. Yeah, Claudia says, what is the main concern amongst Joy's worries? So she's got a few worries, hasn't she? She's waiting for surgery. She's isolated. You know, she's trying to do all the household tasks and everything. So looking after herself. Yeah, thinking about, are there respite options? There's no family, but you know what else? What formal respite might happen? What peer groups might be possible? Yeah, doing some sort of mood scale or anxiety levels. And as you say, Anna, that's a really good one, liaising with other health professionals to see what other help she might need. Great one, Rachel, asking Ron to come in and sit with her, with Sue. Sounds a good one. We scroll down a bit. Yeah. Education. Yes, I think funding for support. Emma suggested they're getting some support for the household tasks. And some of the charities like Age UK, if people are struggling to pay for things like gardeners, and do have people, sort of a handyman gardening type service, who will sometimes help for quite low cost. So that might be worth looking into. Yeah, looking at those feelings about guilt, you know, which are impacting on her sleep, aren't they? You know, Joy lies awake and worries. And as we said, worries during the night are always worse. Pain management, yeah, that's another thing which might be keeping her awake and will certainly be not making it easy for her to do the garden. Looking at strengths, and I think someone earlier mentioned the strengths-based strategies. So, you know, what can she do? What is working well? Yeah, the post-op. So that's looking ahead, isn't it? Planning ahead. You know, what's going to happen when she does go in for surgery, and who's going to look after Sue at the time. positive approaches to care are good. If people are not aware of Teepa Snow, who's mentioned in the thanks Karen for that one. She's an American who does some great videos and some great information about positive approaches, and they're definitely worth a look. So we're slowing down now, but we've got quite a few ideas, which is brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, reconnecting with old friends. And I think that's a really important one, because sometimes people are so focused on looking after the person who needs the care, which is, of course, understandable. The old friendships do go by the wayside. And also those old friends, they can be frightened to step up and say, what can I do? Can't they? But I think people who are good friends, they often do offer, and they say, what can I do? How can I help? And I would always advise people, when someone offers to help, say yes and find something they can do. They might want to help with the garden. They might want to sit with Sue. The thing is, if you keep saying no and that you don't need any help, sooner or later people will stop asking, and they will stop coming to see you and things, and that's unfortunate. But I think that's the nature of things. So just say yes and find something that you would like someone to help you do. Brilliant. So let's just go on to the last slide there, please. So I'm hoping that all of these came up already. I think they probably did. Just to run through them very quickly. So a bit of psychoeducation. I think explaining to people why fluctuations happen and what's going on in the brain is really helpful for them. But also that could have kind of psychological factor that people can't control them. They're not being lazy. They're not being awkward. Though that's not a choice. So when people have a bad day, it's not that they can't be bothered. Obviously, there is sometimes an overlay of apathy in Lewy body conditions, but the actual fluctuating element is not controllable by the person. And back to this idea of acceptance, yes, fluctuations are unpredictable. That is really frustrating. It makes it really difficult to plan. That is the way of Lewy bodies. What can you do about it? Can you get used to making 2 plans for the next day? So, plan A, if it's a good day, we might be going out for a meal with friends, and then going for a walk along the prom. If it's a bad day, we might be going for a drive and then meeting friends for a cup of tea. It avoids disappointment if there's a kind of scaled back plan and a main plan. At least something can happen. Planning ahead, if you know that the person's fluctuations tend to be worse in the afternoon, if there is any pattern, and the things that you need to talk about that are important, then plan ahead for when you're going to have those conversations, when it's less likely to be a difficult and drowsy time. So, in the situation we looked at, there are going to need to be conversations, aren't there, about what's going to happen when the hip surgery is going on, who's going to do the care, respite and things like that. So when are those important conversations going to happen? People have talked about assessments, registering as a carer with the GP, so that when Joy needs appointments for her hip and things, the GP practice can accommodate her caring role and fit her in as they should do, rather than having to wait for a long time. Trying to find as much peer support, respite, any digital issues that are needed to try and get her online so that she can be more involved with the groups and things if she's not already, that are maybe not in her locality or that she can't leave Sue to go to. So thank you, that's brilliant. We've got a few other things there in the chat, so do read what your colleagues have put in. Quickly to recap those 5 issues that we looked into that I think most carers of people with Lewy body dementia find most difficult, and I hope that's given you some strategies to address them. And if we just have the last slide. Thank you. So if you want to take a photo of that or just jot down anything that you don't already know about, that you might find helpful, please do. So just give you a second to grab your phones to do that. Particularly the little videos on ACT therapy, I think, are quite useful if you're not very familiar with that. And they're not very long. And there's another one about values and things, which I think people find quite helpful sometimes. So that's brilliant. Thanks very much. And we'll move on to the next slide.
Thank you, Alison. Thank you to all our speakers today. This webinar has been recorded, so it will be available to watch again through the Community of Practice site, and we will put a link in the chat for the registration page shortly. There's a link that has appeared in the chat just now for our webinar survey. While we're just chatting now for the last few minutes, if you wouldn't mind having a look at that and filling in that survey, that helps us with our planning for future events. Just having a look at the chat, there's been some great comments and engagement and ideas in the chat there. Just to reiterate again for Karen, do have a look at the comments that came in following your talk. You've made a real impact there to everybody today. Lots of thank yous for sharing yours and Alan's story and experience, very inspiring. And I think for myself in particular, it's highlighted the importance of that self-care as a carer, and to make sure that ourselves as visiting professionals make sure that we are encouraging carers to have a look at their own needs, so they can perhaps they haven't been asked that question, how are you, before. There was also a comment about solution-focused hypnotherapy to help carers empty the stress bucket, to find specific personal solutions as well. That came in between two sets of talks, so that's an interesting one to have a look at as well. Let me just go back into the chat now, see if there's anything new since I last looked. Okay. Oh, thank you very much. So huge thank you to Karen again, and to everybody else for the session. Does anybody have any questions that they would like to ask right now before we move on to our last slide? While you're doing the survey. I think I was going to mention there was some good information about sleep disturbances there. We have also done a webinar in the past on sleep disturbances. So if you're interested in taking a deeper look at that, you can have a look at the recording from a previous webinar. There's a question here, Rachel. What's the latest thinking about medication and treatments in Lewy body dementia, please?
Thank you, Anna. So I would always refer people to the Diamond Lewy, of course. That is being updated at the moment. All the evidence has been reviewed, but certainly, I mean, it depends what you're asking about particular, Anna. It's the cholinesterase inhibitors that obviously our first go-to. There are some people who say rivastigmine is preferable over donepezil, but from my understanding, the trials are about the same. It's often about preference, but also the patches can add an added benefit because people don't get as many side effects, particularly around nausea. There's a cobalt trial going on at the moment, which is people can still sign up. We mentioned you can either do that via the Joint Dementia Research, but that is looking at the combination of memantine and cholinesterase inhibitors. There's also a study going on, and I've forgotten what the name of it is, but it's the use of ondansetron, which is via the Parkinson's UK website. People may be familiar with ondansetron. It's a repurposed drug that's used as an antiemetic, and it's the idea behind it. They're trying to test to see if it helps reduce hallucinations. There are some medications that aren't available in the UK, I think if you want further information about medication generally, I think one of our previous sessions, we have done something, but I'm wondering it might be something we could kind of revisit maybe as a community practice, because certainly there is increasing research about the biomarkers and how they work for people with Lewy body dementia. But I don't know, Alison, Ali, have you got anything? Thank you, Alison. Top hat, couldn't remember the name. If anybody's got any other comments?
No, just to say, I think the Diamond Lewy and I think the American equivalent will or have been started to relook and re-see if there's any new evidence. So there might be in the next year or so an update of those, which will be useful.
Yeah, and just to say that we are now having some disease modifying trials. So there has been at least one which is recruited in the UK. So that's really exciting and encouraging for patients, I think, because that's the first idea that we would get something that actually treats the disease rather than just the symptoms. So, you know, it is a really exciting time for new research and new developments, I think.
Thank you all. Thank you. The link that's just been put into the chat there will take you to the Community of Practice registration page, I believe. So if you're not registered, then please do register so you can get access to resources and updates on our next events as we put them on in due course. Sharon says she would love to hear more about disease modification, so that's a good idea for the future. Thank you everybody who has attended today. It's great to see you all, and we hope to see you next time. And a really special thank you to Karen, who says, thank you for allowing me this opportunity to share our story and for your kind feedback. Well, thank you very much. It's been a privilege to have you here. Thank you, everybody.